So I'm on my way back home, and I almost missed my flight. I was pissed, but that's not here nor there. I wanted to just kind of touch bases on some things that I was in conversation about with, some people. And one of the things, or one of the thoughts that came up was, if this is how a person chooses to, worship God, or how they understand God, or they connect with God, why is it wrong? Or why would there not be why would there need to be correction? And so there were a lot of thought processes, and I'll just, for lack of a better word, or just for now, I'll say a lot of opinions were put out. Some of them were mine, and some of them was the other parties. But one of the things that never was brought up from the other party was, if God says that this is truth, then this is truth, because this is what God said. So in a sense, there was there wasn't much of a, and I can't think of the word, but there wasn't much of a respect for God being the final say, but there was more of a, well, this is how I see God. So it in a sense, the standard of righteousness and the standard of good and the standard of truth depended upon the individual and not dependent upon truth, the source of truth, which is God. And there was no how do I say it? There was no, I can't think of the word, but there was no respect, or there was no direct line to where, okay, I could be wrong, And I'm not saying that they never said that they could be wrong. I think it was more so they were speaking on the lines of, well, this is how I see God, or as if this is how a person sees it, then it's okay. And the problem that I have with that is, you can think something is okay because you think it's okay, but that doesn't mean that it's okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, just because you think it's okay doesn't mean that it's okay. And I think that if you believe that there is a God, if you believe that there is someone greater than you, then I think that you also should respect how he thinks, and what he thinks is right and what he thinks is wrong. There has to be a standard of morality. There has to be, because if you leave it up to people to tell you the standard of their morality, then it will go in so many different places. You have people now in America who are fighting for the rights of pedophiles and trying to normalize pedophilia, So is that okay? Just because someone else says it's okay? And have we even consulted with God to say, hey, God, is this okay? You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's the part that I had a problem with when I was speaking to these individuals, that you believe that there's a God, you know that there's a God, you know that there's something greater than you, but the part that I'm not hearing in this conversation is a reverence to what he considers right and wrong. And so, you know, I've been walking with God, you know, not that long, you know, but he's been walking with me for a long time, you know, as long as I've been born. But, you know, I started to finally walk with him. It's about 2 years now. And so one thing that I have learned is that you could be wrong about things, and you have to leave room for error in how you think when it comes to what's right and what's wrong. You know, that doesn't mean that you let how you feel give you a reason to treat people wrongly, but it does at least reverence God as the final say-so of what is right and what is wrong. And you may not know to the extent, or you may not get a full grasp or understanding of if something is wrong until the Lord finally gives you that understanding, and that's okay. But at least reverence him as, hey, you know what? I could be right about this, or I could be wrong about it. But, you know, God will do the correcting where the correcting is needed. And I feel like a lot of times people look at correction as wrong. And correction is not wrong. Correction is not bad. You know, on certain issues, if you're not sure about it, or if you don't, know, don't leave it up to human beings and say, oh, well, if that's what they think is right, or if that's how they choose to be, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I have to disagree with you. You know, just because a person does something and they think it's okay, and that's how they get through life, it doesn't make it okay. You know, once again, you know, it's not to nitpick on people, but and I'm not trying to, like, you know, be looking at folks through a magnifying glass. That's not the purpose of this, but it is to reverence God in matters and on subjects that you don't have any full understanding on. At least get to a point where you can say, I don't know the fullness of this, but I know God does, and however and whenever he chooses to teach me, I'm open to that. Instead of just kind of drawing from your own conclusions and what feels good to you, because, you know, there's a lot of things that we do that feel good, but they aren't right. There's a lot of things that I did, you know, that felt good, and it wasn't okay. You know, I learned that it wasn't okay, you know. So, and once again, I want to use a reference from the Bible. I think it was Solomon. Solomon was a wise king, and yet he did some unwise things. And God allowed him to have a whole bunch of wives. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make what Solomon did right. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes God will allow us to do wrong and allow us to do the wrong thing so that we can see why it's wrong, why we shouldn't do it. For a long time, God allowed me to sleep with women and get drunk and do stuff like that. And if I'm not careful, and you know, even on this trip, there have been times where I caught myself slipping and I got tipsy. You know what I'm saying? But there's grace, thank God, okay? But, you know, there are a lot of times where God will allow us to do the wrong thing so that we can learn why it's not okay. When I was out there sleeping with a whole bunch of women, or sleeping with women, I learned why I shouldn't do this, why it's not okay, you know. And, you know, I remember somebody telling me, sometimes when you keep asking God for something, especially something that's not good for you, he'll give it to you. And he will. And then he'll give it to you to the point where you're like, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this. And that's exactly what happened when I was doing the whole women thing. I indulged in it to the point where, you know, it no longer was satisfying anymore, you know, and it didn't bring me joy and happiness. And if anything, I felt sorrow and I felt distant from God and I didn't feel happy. So anyways, I guess the point of this video is just basically saying that don't lean into your own understanding, you know, and it's not just doesn't just go for you. This goes for me. You know, I'm still growing in God. I'm still growing in who I am. So there are things that I do now that probably years from now I'm going to say, wow, I grew from that. I learned from that. And back then I thought it was okay and it wasn't. And thank God. And that's what grace is for, you know. So, you know, I'm thankful for God's grace. I'm thankful because God's grace it teaches me, you know, and it helps me to grow. You know what I'm saying? So, but either way, you know, don't lean to your own understanding and leave room, you know, to grow and say, I don't have all the answers. You know, I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. And give reverence to the one who does, you know. Sometimes for a lot of people, they get so caught up in the new waves of thinking and they get sucked into other people's thought processes and lifestyles, and because they're ignorant of truth, you know, we tend to lean to our own understanding, you know. But thank God we have a God that is good in a sense where he leads us back to truth, you know, in his timing and how he chooses to do it. You know, so I'm grateful for a God like that, that even when I'm ignorant, all hope is not lost, you know, and God is patient with me in leading me back to wisdom, leading me back to truth, because all of us aren't God. We don't know everything. You know what I'm saying? So once again, leave room for God to come in and correct you. Okay? All right, y'all. Love you guys.